Welcome back to the new series of Corporate Governance TV program. In the previous episode, we have looked at the corporate governance developments in the PLC. In this episode, we will look at the relationship between corporate governance and corporate social responsibility. You will also see a case of CRS application in a global organization. Our first speaker, Professor Richard Welford, will focus on the importance of transparency to corporate social responsibility and the risks and opportunities of good CSR. Please listen to Professor Welford.
For me then, good corporate governance is the foundation of good corporate social responsibility. And I think that it's a very good starting point for businesses who want to show and demonstrate that they are socially responsible companies. One of the things that they should be demonstrating is that their own house is in order and that they are transparent and they are governed extremely well. Let me talk about some of the links between governance and CSR by way of talking about why companies are engaging in CSR issues in this region. For me, corporate social responsibility is two sides of the same coin. And that is, on the one hand, there are great risks associated with not doing what is perceived to be socially responsible. And on the other hand, there are great opportunities for companies who demonstrate good social responsibility. On the risk side, if you have a brand, if you have a reputation, if you have an image that is well regarded, then you've got a risk on your hands. We're seeing an amazing assault at the moment on people like Coca-Cola in India over accusations of water abuse and pesticides in water. That assault on their brand and their reputation has led to a boycott. It's led to them being banned from at least one state in India, though that was subsequently overturned. And it's now leading to a boycott of Coca-Cola products in America and the United Kingdom, led by students in universities asking their students' unions to cancel the contracts with Coca-Cola. We've also seen litigation against a number of companies. I'll come back to this later. Corporate social responsibility is ending up in the courts now in some countries. It's no longer a voluntary initiative in some ways. Some aspects of CSR, particularly human rights aspects of CSR, are leading companies to be prosecuted, particularly in America. Shareholders, I think, are also insisting on improved corporate governance. Last year, one of the biggest mining companies in the world, Freeport, which has mines, particularly in Indonesia, did a human rights audit of its activities in Indonesia. And I thought that was very interesting that a company should go out and actually audit for human rights. The more interesting thing about that story, though, is that the company did that audit on human rights at the insistence of its own shareholders. Its own shareholders were worried about exposure to human rights, allegations of human rights abuses, which could be hugely damaging to a company like Freeport. And the shareholders passed a resolution led by the New York Pension Fund, actually, New York State Pension Fund, insisting that Freeport did a human rights audit. On the other hand, there are great opportunities to doing CSR. Companies who do CSR gain trust, they gain brand recognition, and when they do make occasional mistakes, and every company does make mistakes, companies that are recognized for their social responsibility are forgiven. Companies who continually make mistakes will be attacked for yet another mistake. No companies are perfect, but companies that have good CSR policies and practices in place will be forgiven and will be able to differentiate themselves by doing good work in this area. There's also, I think, a country-specific and Asian context to CSR. We are seeing a number of international agencies pushing good CSR. In China, at a very, very high level, we've seen significant political support for corporate social responsibility. And many of China's leaders are now basically saying that corporate social responsibility is the private sector's commitment to the harmonious society, which is the umbrella term, of course. It is the brands who are leading the way. And I have to say, in Hong Kong, that's also the case. It's some of our local best-known brands in Hong Kong who are leading the way. although not all of them, it has to be said. There are some notable exceptions who ought to be doing more. But worldwide, it's the brands who are leading the way, but it's also the brands that are under most attack. One of the things I need to be very clear about is that I don't think corporate social responsibility is necessarily the same in places like Europe and America with what you would find in Asia. Last year, we did a survey of 450 large listed companies around the world, looking at what their CSR priorities were. Interestingly, if you look at Western companies, their main priorities tend to be quite internal. Their main priorities are around good employment practices, particularly things like non-discrimination, wages, working conditions, employment practices. Then we go on to more external issues. But in Asia, CSR seems to be a much more externally driven issue in terms of priority areas, dealing with local communities, dealing with supply chains, dealing with the whole issue of bribery and corruption, not surprisingly a hot issue in Asia, and only then do we get on to more internal aspects. Now, this has a very important implication, and that is that CSR is not a one-size-fits-all approach. CSR varies from company to company, from industry to industry, from location to location, and it changes over time. It's a bit like fashion sometimes. I would argue, therefore, that you cannot be doing corporate social responsibility unless you're doing some sort of stakeholder engagement. How does a company know what is socially responsible unless it's actually asking its stakeholders what it considers to be socially responsible? And therefore, a good starting point for CSR for many companies will be to go out and talk to your stakeholders, do surveys of stakeholders, get feedback about your priority areas. I've been involved in a number of stakeholder dialogues for a number of companies in Hong Kong over the last couple of years. Every one of those companies has actually viewed that as a very, very positive way of gaining some knowledge about what their stakeholders are thinking. And I think companies who embark on this find it a very, very useful process.
As you have heard, Professor Welford suggests that CSR can potentially damage a brand's reputation, and conversely, good CSR builds positive brand recognition and creates consumer trust and goodwill.